I draw references to like people I've known in the past, and also myself. Like
Yeah.
you could also like look in like at flaws within yourself and be like, just be observant and
Yeah.
like it was funny because I was in another interview where I was saying that like I feel like I put a little bit of myself into like each character almost. And this was like during Siren's Lament, and she was like, so where does Krim come from? Like the creepy shark tooth soothsayer guy. And I'm just like, oh shoot, actually, maybe I could be creepy sometimes. Maybe that's where the inspiration comes from.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, it's just like observe what you like, take the things in media that you think are well done, take note of it, put it aside, store it in your head. And for the things that you don't like, also store those in your head and take note of it. Be like, okay, how can I improve this?
I think that's a good tip to give people who are either writers or webcomic creators, is draw upon real life to kind of formulate your characters. With all of the characters in Siren's Lament and in Eaternal, Nocturnal, everybody has likable traits. So I wanted to ask, like, how did you give each character, like, basically their path of growth throughout the story?
So I would think that's like a key part of like starting a story is like knowing your characters, like where they start off and where they end up in the future. So with those things in mind, that's how you should formulate your original characters and stuff. So it was deliberate that like Eve was obviously sleep deprived, tired like type of person who's like a people pleaser, but hasn't really gotten quite a hold on life and is not really sure what she's doing and just kind of like fumbling through life. Whereas we have like Day, who's kind of like the contrast to her, who's just like taking it day by day and like, oh well, I'll just go wherever the wind takes me and like just do whatever I want without thinking about too much of the future, while Eve is like stressing about the future. And I kind of like that concept of them kind of learning from each other and growing from each other. I thought that was like really romantic.
It's very romantic.
And if you know me, I'm definitely like a friends to lover type of person. Like I'm really into that.
Yeah.
So it's really heavily based on that, of them like growing together. And from the very start, I did know that like, hey, this is where I want Eve to end up. I want her to like be a little bit, not more carefree, but to embrace like, you know, her passions and be more like free with her heart. And as for Day, from the very start, I was like, this guy's gonna have commitment issues. And it was funny because I remember reading a comment one time of someone being like, I really love Day as a character. He's not your typical like rich CEO guy who's like possessive. And in my head, I was just like, yeah, he's just broke with commitment. So like, yeah, that's my character. But yeah, but I eventually, like from the very beginning, I knew that, you know, he would open his heart up to Eve, and embrace, like, allowing himself to be loved, and like, basically how it ends. I've mentioned this in previous like interviews, but like, it's kind of like a nerdy way of looking at it. But like in writing stories, it's good to know the beginning and end, especially in terms of plot. I think that's really important, but also like characters. Like, how do you want this character to start off? How do you want this character to end? And then you could figure out the middle, like as you go. Because that's typically how I go about it. Some people, I think, have like it all figured out, but I have inklings of like the story, and then I piece it together as I go.
Yeah.
But I definitely have a beginning and an end.
When I first started, I was like, I have to know exactly everything that needs to happen up until the end. It is hard. And like within that process, it's like, okay, I know the beginning, I know the end, but like, what are the things, like, how do I pace it right? Like, do I need to know like at least the key parts of the plot with your stories that you create? How do you find those middle parts? Like, do you have like the major events or incidents that happen and then you kind of just write around them, or how do you do it?
That's a good question. So I know like key parts of like, okay, we need to get from point A to point B. And like, it is a weekly process of like, okay, I'm gonna, like each week, like I sit down with like a blank document and like, this is gonna be the script. With the goal of like, okay, point A to point B, but how are we gonna get there? So like I said before, it's a lot of asking myself questions. What do I want to happen? Like, and like, you also have to take into account like making things on a weekly basis. Like you have to make sure each chapter is contributing something to the story and moving the story like along. It has to add something to the plot or like progress it forward. So with that in mind, like, you could just you know, go from point A to point B, but constantly ask yourself questions like, okay, how would this interaction go down? Maybe give yourself a few like options of like, oh, it could go this way, it could go that way. Which way do I want it to go? Or just like entertain a lot of ideas in your mind, and then whichever you like best, go with that and piece the rest together. I think that's how it mostly works in my mind.